Hello everybody and welcome back to Odin's movie blog. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today I will be doing a review of the 2019 film starring Daniel Radcliffe known as Guns Akimbo, where a man one day wakes up and he has guns attached to his hands and finds out that he has got to fight to save his life in a world of underground fighting and killing, all live streamed for the entertainment of many. Now, this film has a lot of very interesting concepts. I do love how it has a commentary about the current state of media. In fact, I think it's interesting that this film came out long before, at least a year or two, and was probably in the process of being made before all the stuff that's recently happened with Antifa and BLM, etc. And yet, I just feel like we are in this position, and we've been in this position for a long time, where so many of us are just so tied to our social media accounts on Twitter or to the mainstream media, where they're constantly covering violence and they're constantly covering all these different crazy atrocities happening, and we are glued to it and we just cannot look away. And that film, this film, Guns Akimbo, kind of plays on that by trying to say there's this underground world, almost like you could say this Fight Club world, where people are put up against each other, everything's live streamed, and it's meant to be a real life version of a game, essentially, where it's two characters trying to kill each other, and one of the characters ends up dying and then gets put on another mission, and this is all live streamed for the entertainment of many, many people. So, of course, you already have that concept that's very interesting. Now, as far as positives and negatives to this film, it's a very mixed bag for me personally. First off, let's talk about the director and writer of this film, called Jason Lee Howden. Jason Lee Howden is probably a name that you've never heard before, because this is really one of the first movies that he has actually directed and had full control over, at the very least, that has featured, mainstream actors and has had a somewhat mainstream production and has been rather a mainstream distribution. This was actually a film put out by Lionsgate. Shout out to Lionsgate for sending me a review copy of this to cover. But other than that, he has done actually a lot of visual effects work on films like War for the Planet of the Apes. He also worked on the TV series Legion. He worked on Gods of Egypt, The Hobbit, Battle of the Five Armies, The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug, The Wolverine, Man of Steel as well. So he has actually a very rich history working on some big project films, only in the specific visual effects department. And that is something that I think kind of leads into one of the parts of this movie that I actually thoroughly enjoyed, and I think that is the color palette and the colors used in the film, and that the overall visuals that this film has to play for it. I really do think that the visual qualities and that the visual styling of this film is very, very unique, and it really adds to the fact that even though this is taking place in modern times, and even though there are definitely references to what if someone who had guns attached to their hands went out in public, what would that look like and what would that be like? It kind of plays on that for laughs and plays on that for drama too, and I think it does so very well, while at the same time having these stylistic approaches and these stylistic these stylistic shots at various points that also show that it is somewhat of a, not I guess a dystopian, but somewhat of an otherworldly or a different time period concept, that this is something that could actually happen. People watching online for people being killed for sport, again, does not really come across as something that we see in our everyday life, but when you just match that up with the real life situations and scenarios that the rest of the world is being put into, the rest of the world that kind of doesn't really know about this going on unless you're one of the persons that watches these people kill each other online. It's just really fascinating to see those two worlds, grind up against each other and just, interact with each other and kind of do this push-pull mindset. With all that being said, and again, visual effects being a pretty interesting concept, or rather the visuals of the film being an interesting concept, unfortunately, the visual effects that you see throughout the film, whether it is the blood splatters, whether it is the use of guns, whether it is just the use of any sense of CGI, slow motion, etc., is a very mixed bag. There's some scenes where you're like, hey, that actually looks pretty cool, pretty badass. There's obviously a lot of stunt work being done in here, and not just random CGI people that are looking like they're doing stunts, and it's actually computer-generated images. So it's good to see that they did indeed bring in a stunt team for this film, because there are some stunts that look fantastic, but there's also some pretty bad stuff too. As I mentioned, the blood splattering at times just looks absolutely atrocious. There's a couple of scenes of characters, including Daniel Radcliffe's, flying through the air, shooting his gun, and like the gun blasts just don't look quite right. And of course, him flying through the air doesn't look quite right. The use of green screen and CG effects, you all know I'm a stickler for that kind of thing, and so that, I think, to me, detracts away from the overall story as well. But I would say the biggest issue that I personally have with this film, if I had to say my biggest pet peeve or my biggest concern or my biggest gripe with the movie, is easily the editing that they have in this movie. I think the editing is very haphazardly put together. I think the editing has almost this ADD-like quality to it, where you're just jumping around from shot to shot to shot. And obviously that is very reminiscent of the current culture that we live in today, where that is just simply how things go. That is just simply, the world that we live in today, where so many movies and so many projects, especially on television, are made so that way our minds are constantly being pushed in a different direction. But for me, especially as someone that has ADD, and I'm trying to watch the movie and understand it and have this full connection of the movie and full understanding of the film, I find myself struggling throughout of it because of this haphazardly put together and oddly paced film. The film is only about 90 minutes, and the pacing just does not really help to make the film feel like it's moving along at a good pace, and that of course causes some issues when it comes to the narrative, because it doesn't matter how well you write characters or how well you write dialogue, if you don't have pacing to help support that, it's really going to fall behind in the end by a great deal. Basic premise of the film is that it is a group called Schism. They call themselves a virus called Schism, and they are the organization that's under the scenes that is basically running this entire operation. You find out that basically what they do is they kidnap people in certain situations, put them into various scenarios where they are put one-on-one against another, and the only way for them to escape, or at least the only way they are promised to be able to escape, is by killing someone else in the process. Of course, when we look to Daniel Radcliffe's character, Daniel Radcliffe does a great job in this movie, and I would say the acting in this movie is for the most part pretty well put together. Daniel Radcliffe obviously buys very much into this role. He starts off as someone that kind of works for a tech company and is kind of known for being an online troll. There was actually a really cool kind of montage sequence of him going onto online forums being a professional troll. He ends up trolling the wrong person, and then boom, he gets a knock on his door, gets knocked down, and sure enough, Daniel Radcliffe then gets drugged and gets guns attached to his hands. And that, I think, is one of the coolest parts of this film, is whenever you have Daniel Radcliffe walking around with the guns attached to his hands, like bolted to his hands, it's just great. There's so many great comedic elements with it, because he's trying to keep him into his pockets when he's out in public. Seeing him try to pick up things like a cell phone to call someone, or do a myriad of other tasks, like even trying to go to the bathroom, is just really great physical comedy. And so it does have those elements. Again, there's a lot of entertainment. That's the one thing I can say. This film has a lot of entertaining concepts to it. The most entertaining of which I would argue is an actor, Rhys Darby. Rhys Darby is actually known, at least to me, to have done a lot of work with the Flight of the Conchords group. He was featured in their episodes for quite a bit as their manager, and he's just a really funny character actor. He's been in a couple other things too, but just the very few scenes that he's in the movie just stole them, in my opinion, and it's almost like I would rather have had a film focused on him. And I think that had they slowed the film down, had not as quick edits, and had a better pacing to make it maybe an hour and 45-minute movie without the crazy editing, that you could have actually developed that character even a little bit more, and it could have ended up in a interesting process, or rather a more interesting, and I would say a more adaptable and coherent story by the end of its run. So a couple of the notes, a couple of other things that I talked about, said there are passable visual effects, but many of them could have been better. One of the comments I said, it's almost like Edward Scissorhands meets Guns, which was a pretty funny concept. Again, the fact that he can't pick things up with his hands because they're guns. That whole process played out pretty well. I said they have a very modern and also beat-heavy soundtrack, which I actually kind of liked. Many of the songs were actually variations and interpretations of them. So, for example, there is this heavier rock-pop variation of Ballroom Blitz, and it's actually a lot of fun, and you see that happen throughout the film, where they take another song and do just that. The hilarious concept is indeed there, because especially when you have the rest of the world being relatively normal, right? There's cops. At one point, he tries to tell the cops, hey, by the way, here's what's going on. And then it's this guy with guns attached to his hands. And so therefore, the cops react just the way that a cop would react in that circumstance. So again, that just kind of adds to the levity of the overall situation, which means it comes across as very realistic for what it is. Obviously, it's still in a fictionalized universe, though it definitely bends the rules a lot and does not always follow the world that it sets up. And so I would say that's also a major issue with this film, is that it seems to set up various things that must be true and various things that exist in their universe, but then there's also other things that happen that seem to contradict what that world has been set up by, right? It kind of indicates, okay, the world itself is normal, except there's this underground group that, a lot of people know about, but not everyone knows about. And therefore, sometimes you see these connections, sometimes you see these two groups interacting, but it's still relatively separate. But then just a few minutes later, you have this crossing over of the brands, and then it just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. The character of Richter is a fantastic villain, plays a great psychotic, I don't know what the actor's name is, but he plays a great psychotic character, which seems to have very interesting motivations. He has one of the best lines in the movie, because at one point someone says, well, the cops are going to come, and, we're going to call the cops, and he says, oh, no, I'm gonna poo-poo in my pantaloons. And just the way he says poo-poo in the pantaloons had me rolling on the floor. It does indeed at the end set up for more in this world if they wanted to. Whether or not that is a direct sequel to various characters, I will not say for the purposes of not trying to spoil any major plot points for the film, but I can say this is a film that obviously has an idea of potentially going and making more films. But of course, I think it could also easily work on its own. And to be honest, I kind of hope that it does stay on its own, because even though this film is crazy, even though this film is a lot of fun, again, it has a great soundtrack, it has some interesting visual effects, the editing is just a little bit too much. It's a little bit haphazard there. You've got great acting performances through all of this. Daniel Radcliffe does a great job playing a character that, once again, is being thrown into something and wakes up with guns attached to his hands. And there's this really cool effect where every time a bullet gets fired, it tells you exactly how much is left in each of those. His character is interesting because his character is essentially this vegan type character. And it's not that they're trying to be, saying, oh yeah, let's promote the veganism, or even the opposite. It's just funny to see, oh, this guy who is a pacifist vegan is now the one that's being thrown into a situation where he has to actually kill people and has to actually try to defend himself. So that's fascinating in and of itself. So anyway, if I had to give this film an overall grade, I think I would end up giving it a C+. Again, I think that there's a lot of fun to be had in this movie. If you want to turn your brain off for 90 minutes and just sit back and enjoy the ride, I think that you will have a good time with this film. If you want a little bit more, and if things like really high-paced editing and very haphazard editing at that distracts you from movies and kind of makes you maybe get a headache at times because of just how much it's jumping around and it's hard to follow, then this might not be the film for you. But if any of those other things that I mentioned seem to indicate it might be something that you would be interested in, I would say, hey, definitely not something that I would say don't go to see, like Artemis Fowl. In this case, I would say, yeah, you know what? If you're looking for a good time, that's only going to be 90 minutes. Not a bad way to spend your day. But anyway, what are your thoughts about this? Do you know what you think about this film? Have you seen it? Let me know your thoughts and comments in the comment section below. If you like this video, smash that like button, hit that subscribe. It helps out a lot. You are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful night, and as always, God bless. And now a huge shout out to all of my June Patreon members: Albertus Magnus, Animation Commentator, Brian P., David Bobrizik, Dion, Divex, Enrique Evangelista, Father Christopher Miller, hail to you, Father, Frank the Tank and the Shawhan Wiener Dog Clan, Harold Francis, the Hunky Chunky Funky Monkey, Inflamed Wood, Intertrap Productions, Jason Clark, Jeffrey Toon, Kenneth Cameo, Lady T, Laura Story, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Mike Jackson, Mr. Peabody and his evil twin with the beautiful hair, Orange Hat Reviews, Outpost Dyer, Out of Step with Reality, Riff Magos, Rosetta Allen, Steve Glasker, Teresa Martin, Theodore Bendon, Tina Bojan, The DJD Show, and Tina B. And also to my Subscribe Star members: Edgardo Martinez, John B., Perpetual Punster, Robert Revo, Mr. Roy, Glinzer, G2 Cool 99, Dark Star 57, J. Alex McCarthy Jr., US 888209 Fast, Dean Heiss, Harold Francis, J. Rod, the Beer Guru, and also Nebanon G. Adams and ZK Man, and Jonathan Carney, and Jacob Juice. Thank you all so much for being a member of Patreon and Subscribestar. And seriously, it really does mean a lot. Helps keeps the light on, helps me able to do things like the giveaways for my $5 and up backers on Patreon and Subscribestar, and also be able to put more stuff into the actual channel itself, including upgrading different components, whether it be webcams, microphones, things like that. All of that helps to support it, and it really does mean a lot. So thank you all so very much. Please, if you want to have your name shouted out or look at any of the other perks, which include things like indeed having access to exclusive 4K digital giveaways every single month, and also an exclusive podcast hosted on Patreon and Subscribestar, and also YouTube memberships as well at the $10 and up level, featuring John the Flick Pig Flickinger. Please check all of those things out in the description of this video. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful day, and as always, God bless.